Well, coming up as a child, my mom worked at General Motors, and my father worked at Dobbins Lockheed Air Force Base. And I went to private schools for a very long time, and then it came to a point to where I told my mom that I wanted to go to regular school with, normal people. Let me say that. And I went to public schools, and I was very wild and very loud. My mother always told me the girls are supposed to be seen and not heard, and I never really understood what that meant because the more she told me, the louder I got. My parents made sure that I was provided with the best of the best. We moved from the metropolitan Atlanta area and we moved to Stone Mountain, and that's where I proceeded to go to elementary school. And I stayed in trouble. I stayed in fights. I was always doing something that I had no business doing. Um, and I had a brother. His name was Undrea. He's deceased now. Um, we were born on the same day, 7 years apart. And we would create little things to do around the house, like throwing water balloons or, just being bad kids. You know what I'm saying? But my childhood was great. I feel in my heart that I was provided with everything materially, but there was no love emotionally given from my mother. My father, he showed all the love he could, but my mother was the person responsible for my first traumatic experience at 10 years old. Um, and that that episode put me in a downward spiral. You want me to go into what happened?
Mm.
Um, at the age of 10 years old, well, before the Georgia lottery became the Georgia lottery, you used to have loan charts and bookies and numbers, and you used to go to church, and the prophets would give the number for the next day that were to come out. And my mother took me to see this man named Bishop Williams, and it was on the corner of Auburn Avenue, no, not Auburn, Ashby Street in Atlanta. And it was a funeral home. It was Watkins Funeral Home. We would go in the basement, and he would preach or whatever. But this particular day, it was my mother, my father, and my brother and myself. My father and my brother sat outside, and my mother told me to come go with her. And I went through the doors and I went with her, and he gave me a hug, that old fake crap, but he gave me a hug and was like, welcome, we're gonna have a talk, woo, 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 woo. And he told my mama, he said, now it's time. And I looked at my mama, and my mama nodded her head like it's okay, And my mama stood up and she held my dress over my head, and this man proceeded to fondle me. And my mom sat there and watched. And 3 days later, my mom hit the number for 273 for $10,000. You know, I knew it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong when the bishop told me, he was like, you are never to tell anybody what happened in this room. And I didn't tell anybody until I got I say about 14 years old. That did something to me. Um, I don't know. It hurt me a lot because my understanding of a mother was supposed to protect and love her child, and she put me in a very unsafe situation. After that happened, proceeded to go to high school, and I played basketball. I went to Redan High School. I played basketball, but my thing to play and that I was really good at was softball. I was a softball star. I was a shortstop, and I love this. I love playing softball. And me and my mom, we never got along at all. My mom was always a strict disciplinarian, and my father was laid back and lenient. You know what I'm saying? And every time I asked to go somewhere, my mother, could I go? This was in my upper teens. I would ask my mom, could I go somewhere? It was always no. I'm like, why? But when I grew older and I started going out, I found out why. You know, I found out that, well, let me back up. I played softball, was really good at softball. We won the national championship of Georgia. Um, and then my grades fell behind, and my father was asking me, why was my grades falling behind? Prior to that, I heard a conversation. There was a man used to call on our phone, and he was like, "May I speak to Bertha?" And I was like, "Don't know Bertha live here." But this particular morning, my mom answered the phone, and evidently she didn't hear me when I said, "There's not a Bertha here." She said, "This is she," and I proceeded to listen to the conversation. And my mom was like, "This is Bertha." They started talking, they had a conversation, and I'm on the phone, I'm listening. And he told her that he loved her, and she told him that she loved him too, and she would see him later on that night. And I was astonished. And I sat up in my bed, and my mom walked down the hallway, and she was like, "Black girl, what's wrong with you?" And I didn't say anything. I was crying. She came back from the kitchen. She said, "I said, what's wrong with you?" I said, "Well, I heard you talking to that man. I heard you tell that man that you loved him." And she said, "Girl, you were sleeping. You were dreaming, you know. Making me seem like I was crazy." And I know I heard what I heard. So I didn't say anything, but I became very rebellious. I'm talking about very rebellious. I would go to school, pick fights, come home, get suspended, come home. My mom tried to discipline me, and I mean, it was just a knockdown, drag out. We would fight, because I had so much hurt and so much anger built up inside of me, and I had begun to start hating my mama you know. And then I went ahead and my grades started getting bad, and I had to go to open campus. So when you go to open campus is basically a school designed for you to catch up to what you didn't do in regular school. And I proceeded to go to open campus, and I started hanging out with the quote unquote in crowd. I started experimenting with marijuana. Um I experimented with marijuana, and then I experimented with cocaine. And I liked the way cocaine made me feel. Um, and then I moved along. I graduated high school, and then I went to college. And college lifestyle was really good. That's when I began to do some things, some promiscuous things, in the nightlife of the city of Atlanta downtown. Um, and I started to get noticed by men, but it was the wrong kind of men that I was getting noticed by. It was drug dealers, and I met this drug dealer. He's my children, my first son, Ricky. He's his father, and he was one of the biggest drug dealers in Atlanta. And but I didn't know anything about quote unquote the game. I didn't, and he was kind of like he couldn't count money, and he would bring big bags of money to my home, and I would count them. He was like, "Count this. I need you to count this," and I would stack everything in $100 bills. And my mom told me I should have got some of his money, but I was naive at that time, and I didn't. I got pregnant by him. I got pregnant with my son Ricky, and I had Ricky. And 6 months, so Ricky was 6 months old, and the feds came and kicked in the door. And had I been living there, I would have went to jail. I would have went to prison too. So I proceeded to raise my son by myself, me and my dad, with the help of my dad. I moved in with my dad, and my dad helped me. I started living that lifestyle, not caring, just it was all about me. I would always leave my son with my father, but I made sure my son had everything that he needed. But I was the cycle was repeating itself because I wasn't there emotionally for my son. Um and I would hang out, and I started dating this guy, and we went to Frozen Paradise on Godby Road in Atlanta. And I went with him, but he didn't want me to go in the club because there was somebody else he was trying to get into. So when I got inside the club, I had his jacket on. I got inside the club and he had me put out. He paid the bouncer $300 to put me out. And when he put me out, I got in my car and I'm like, I got his jacket on and I'm filling the pockets. And there was this big, large quantity of crack cocaine. And I had some cigarettes and I said, uh-huh, I'm gonna see what people feel like when they get high. And I crunched it up. You want me to be honest? I crunched it up and I laced my cigarette with it. And the that first hit, I had an orgasm. And I rode around 285. I mean, I rode around and rode around. And then the guy called me the next day and he asked me, he was like, well, where my money at? I was like, I ain't got no money. He said, I'm talking about the money that was in my pocket. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So when he saw me, he jumped on me. And that was my first abusive relationship. And I didn't stop there. I just proceeded. I just went on and on and on. I just started smoking these cigarettes, laced with crack cocaine. And I started neglecting my son. I started neglecting myself. I wasn't looking like the Undrea before I was doing the crack. And my family members were noticing it. And my aunt asked me, she said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. To give you a little brief history, I have a lot of people who are in recovery that are in my family. And my aunt, she knew the patterns and they knew, but I was in denial. I was in denial about a lot of things. And it got to the point, my mom would come over there to my dad's house. She cursed me out, called me everything but a child of God. Told me I was never going to amount to anything, spit on me. I mean, it was everything. It was bad. And you can't kick a dog when it's down. You know what I'm saying? And that just drew my self-esteem into the ground to where I just didn't even care anymore. I dropped my kids off with my father and I keep it moving. Sometimes it was weeks at a time before my parents or my kids saw me because I was out there in the street trying to find means and ways to get more. I was trying to find something because there was an empty hole on the inside of me, and I didn't know what it was, you know. And I was trying to fill that hole to make the pain go away, to just to feel a little bit better. And I found that satisfaction in drugs, alcohol, men, women, whatever made me feel whole at that given time. You know, I found myself with the in crowd stealing. I found myself going into Walmart, taking their stuff and selling their stuff and just taking care of my habit, because I'm gonna keep it real with you. I have, what they call tricked for drugs. That was not my thing because I didn't want nobody touching me. But I've been down that road too. But it didn't set well with me. So I would go to the stores and I would steal and get what I needed to get. I would even get something for my kids, because I felt guilty because I hadn't seen them. Well, when I go home, I'm gonna take them this and that. And I did that. I did that for years. I'm talking about years. I smoked crack cocaine for 35 plus years. You know, uh, in and out of rehabs, in and out of rehabs. I'm a. My first treatment center was in 1997. I went to Warner Robins, Georgia, to a place called Gateway. And I went to this place, and the thing about it is, they would give us our cards so we could go cash out, so we could take the money off the card and pay them. And they gave us our cards, and they dropped us off at the Social Security office, me and this other girl. And we went. But we didn't go to the Social Security office. I was asking her, hey, where can I get me something? And she took me to go get something. And they came back. We weren't there. But we made up some kind of lie. I don't even remember what we told them. And we came back to the facility. I had drugs on me. I took drugs into the facility, and the girl told on me. And she said that she told me that she had drugs because she had pee dirty, but I already had my daughter's pee in a container. You know how that goes. Um, and when they drug tested me, I was clean, you know. And she told me that I had brought drugs back, and they searched my room, and the lady found the drugs, and they called the sheriff department in it. And the sheriff came in, and my daughter was holding on to the sheriff's leg, and she was crying. And he said, "I'm going to test it." They were supposed to take me to jail, but they didn't. And I truly believe it was my daughter grabbing that officer's leg. You know, he had compassion. But the next morning, me and my daughter had to go. Mind you, I knew nobody in Warner Robins. I didn't even know where I was. I went to a place in Macon, Georgia called the Macon Rescue Mission. And there was this lady by the name of Demetrius Grace. She came and picked me up that morning, and she took me to Macon, Georgia, and she took me to Project Connect. I completed Project Connect. I stayed at Project Connect for a year. This is where the seed was planted for me to learn about recovery. But once I got that year clean and I went into that program, see, I had a misconception of what recovery was. My conception was recovery is me getting my weight back, getting me somewhere to stay, getting me a job, not fully knowing how to maintain everything that God had so graciously blessed me with. So I took my same behavior. See, but people fail to realize is it really wasn't about the drugs or the alcohol. It was sincerely about my behavior. My behavior was awful, and I would take the same behaviors that I practiced in the street into recovery. Therefore, I stayed clean for a year, started back dating a dope guy, got his package, blew his package, did what I needed to do, and I was back at it again. This was repetition over my life. I mean, I've been doing this all of my life, and I've got 3 kids. Well, I had 3 kids. I had Ricky, and I had Dondria, and I had Tristan. You know, I was there, but I wasn't there. You understand what I'm saying? My father helped me take care of those kids. Um, I just ran rapid all over Decatur, Georgia, and Atlanta. And you want me to go? Okay. So, in 2007, no, let me back it up. So I was staying at my dad's house. I was staying at my dad's house. It was my 3 kids, my dad, and my brother Andre, and my son Ricky and my brother. They didn't have a good relationship at all, and my brother was an alcoholic. My brother came in the house, and my son would call my dad, and when he said that, my brother said, "That's not your daddy." And my son told him that if you say one more word, I will blow your brains out. And my brother said something, and I sat there and I watched my son blow my brother's brains out. And the matter was just all over my face. You know, and I went to the hospital, and I prayed for my brother. I laid on his chest for a long time, and I prayed for him, and I asked God to spare him. I went back home, and I came back to I went to Macon, and my dad called me, and he said, Andre didn't make it. And that was a hard blow because that was my only sibling, my baby brother. So, you know what I did? I used. I got high. I continued to get high. My son didn't do a day in jail. Um, and mind you, at that time, my father had colon cancer and prostate cancer during this process. And my daddy sat there and literally watched his son's brains get blowed out as he laid in the bed. And I went back home, and I was taking my daddy to chemo, taking him back and forth, trying to take care of my daddy. But during the course of me trying to take care of my daddy, man, my daddy was the only one who really supported me and who believed in me. My behaviors, I stole from my dad. Um, he would be laying in the bed and sleeping and whatever, and I would go up under his bed. He had his money hid up under his bed. I would go and I would steal it while he's sleeping. I would take money out of his bank account, and this is the only man who supported me. You know, and my father came and picked me up. I moved back to Macon after my daddy, after he had his colon surgery. I moved back to Macon, and he would come visit me every week. And the last time he came to visit me, I said, "Daddy," I said, "what did the doctor say?" He said, "Oh, they gave me a 6-month shot." And I didn't even realize what he was saying, but he was just telling me that he had 6 months to live. And I was so selfish and self-centered that I didn't have enough. I didn't even take the time to realize what he was saying because I wasn't in my right mind. My dad came to see me on a Wednesday. It was May. It was May the 27th, if I'm not mistaken, because my dad died on a Good Friday. And my dad came and he took me and my baby boy Jordan, my grandbaby. He took us out to eat, and mind you, let me step back. I've always told my dad that I loved him, but he was like, mm. He never told me, I never heard those words come out of his mouth, as a child, but I knew because he showed me so much unconditional love. But this day he came and he said, "Look, uh I'm gonna put your name on the deed. I'm gonna move into the house Friday, and I'm coming back down here for you to sign the deed." And I was like, "Okay, Daddy," but where I was that Friday? In the trap, trying to find means and ways to get more to get high. And I kept seeing my girlfriend drive up and down the road. I'm like, what the? Why is she driving up and down the road? Damn, what's up? And but I was stuck. I couldn't move. I was paranoid. I thought if I went out the door, somebody was gonna get me. And I kept saying, she just kept riding. I was like, okay, fine. I ran out of money and didn't have no more drugs. So I had motives for going out the door to ask us for some money or whatever. But when she saw me, she rushed up to me. She's like, "You need to get in the car." And I was like, "I need to get in the car for what?" She's like, "You need to call your mama." I said, "I ain't finna call my mama. I'm not calling my mom." And she was like, "Undrea, you need to call your mother." And I was like, "Girl, I'm not calling my mother." By the time I said that, my mother was on the phone. And I was like, "Yeah, what's up, Mom?" She was like, baby." I said, "What, Mom?" She said, "Baby, you need to come home." I said, "Come home for what?" She said, "He gone." And I said, "Who gone?" She said, "Your daddy passed last night and it ate me up. I mean, it ate me up because who was going to be there to pick up the pieces? Nobody. She wasn't going to pick up the pieces, you know. And in that moment, I got really fearful and I became really scared because I didn't know what my future looked like. And when my father passed, it tore me up so bad. And mind you, I was in my world. I didn't go home for 2 days because I wasn't willing to accept that he had left, you know. But when I did go home, I went and saw him, and he was just laying there. He had a smile on his face, like he was at peace, and he was okay, you know. And I had all this stuff, and he had some money in the bank, and everybody was trying to get the money, but the money was rightfully mine because I was the only heir. Uh, my son fought me about that money. We went to court about that money, and I ended up with the money. He went in there and he told the judge that my mom's an addict and she has a drug problem. And the judge was like, "I don't care if your mom does have a drug problem. She's rightful heir to this money." And they granted me the money. And I got that money and I blowed that money within 30 days. Uh, and then I decided that I wanted to get my life intact. So I went to Outer Darkness, and the director, they choose for you where they want you to go. The director was like, well, I know where you're going. And I was like, where am I going? She was like, you're going to New Beginnings. I was like, whatever. I was like, I want the hardest program. She was like, you're going to New Beginnings. And when I went to New Beginnings, I would never forget it. It was storming really bad. And this volunteer came and picked me up, and she took me to Martin, Georgia. And I went to New Beginnings Ministry in Martin, Georgia. And I had already made up in my mind, Daddy gone, Mama ain't trying to hear it. It's time to put my big girl drawers on, and it's time for me to grow up and assume the responsibility that my father had, which was take care of my kids. And I took care of my kids from a distance, because you can take kids there, but I ain't want my kids were with their fathers. And I went there, and that was the hardest program in the freaking world. New Beginning separates the women from the little girls. But I'm so grateful that I went to New Beginnings, because had I not gone to New Beginnings, I never would have known, I never would have realized that I was full of religion. I didn't have a relationship with God. I knew the Bible verses, I knew everything, but I didn't have a relationship. And it was at New Beginnings that I developed a relationship with God. And that was a hard program. I asked him to give me strength to make it through. And that's when I met Miss Santana, Shonda Santana. And she just took a liking to me, and she said, "You're going to be all right." She used to pray for me on so many occasions. She prayed for me, because at one point I wanted to run down the road, and y'all don't know anything about New Beginnings, but New Beginnings is in the rehab is in the middle of nowhere. You got nothing but pastures, cows, horses, and the possums and all that. So, if you run down the road, you ain't no telling what you might run into. But I completed that program at New Beginnings, and I came to Athens, Georgia. And I went to FFB. That was not a successful program for me, because I wasn't willing to change some of my behaviors. I wanted to hold on to some of those behaviors because I was secure with those behaviors. They were my safe haven. And I got kicked out of that program for a week because I forged a signature. And I went out of town with one of my roommates, and one of my roommates went to go play pool in the pool hall where they serve alcohol. But I was outside. I was outside in the patio with my husband. I never went in, and she came back bragging about what had happened. Whoop de whoop whoop, and we got kicked out of the program permanently. I didn't know where I was gonna go. I didn't know I didn't know anything about Athens, Georgia. And I called my mama, and my mama was like, call Evelyn Bloodsaw. And I called Miss Bloodsaw, and she came and picked me up, and she took me to the Holiday Inn downtown when it was and I stayed in the presidential suite for about 3 months. The church paid for it. And then when it was time for me to go from there, I went to another place on Atlanta Highway, which was really nice. And I stayed there for about 4 or 5 months. And I had to make up in my mind, was I ready to do this thing? And yeah, I was ready to do it. So, I went to, let me see, I went back home. I went back home to Macon, Georgia. No, 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 no. No, I didn't. I went to the Salvation Army because I got tired of being not doing nothing, not going to church, and the church was paying for me to stay there, and I wasn't giving anything back to the church. So I went and stayed in the Salvation Army. I stayed in the Salvation Army for about 6 weeks. I saved up enough money to go get me a one-bedroom apartment and some apartments in Macon, not Macon, in Athens, and I went and got me an apartment. I stayed clean for I stayed clean for about, I'll say 6 months after I had got out of New Beginnings. And I stayed there, and me and my husband, we stayed in the apartment. and everything was going okay. And then all of a sudden, the disease shows up. You know, I saw a dope boy, and the disease was like, okay, go get you one. And I didn't have any tools. The tools that I have now, I didn't have then. And I was like, I was doing what I wanted to do because that's what I was used to doing. So I went ahead and I got one. I was like, hey, let me get something. And that's when I relapsed. And it was a vicious cycle, a really vicious cycle. It got to the point where I was robbing, um, I was fighting. Me and my husband, that relationship became very abusive, and he started using with me. And eviction notice came because I didn't have the rent. So I told my baby's children's father that I was packing my stuff up and I needed for him to come pick me up. That my husband was gonna stay in Athens and I was gonna come back to Macon, and that's what I did. I went to Macon. I stayed in Macon for about 3 months. Um, and Lacey Cawthorn, I ain't gonna never forget it. She called me and she told me, she said, what you doing? I said, I ain't doing nothing. I said, I'm trying to get me a ride back to Athens so I can go see my husband. She's like, well, I'm going down through there, you can ride with me. And I rode up here to Athens, Georgia with her. And me and my husband stayed in a tent behind the library in Athens, Georgia. And that just wasn't gonna work for me because one night we was getting high and there was a raccoon running around the tent. And I was like, no, bruh, I'm getting ready to go get me some help. So that next morning, I got up and I was like, I don't care, I'm going. I went to CSU. I went to the CSU and I got into the CSU, and there was a program. I was like, everybody was talking about ARC, Acceptance and Recovery Center. They was like, it is so hard to get in that program. I said, watch me get into that program. And I got into that program, and the way I got into that program was Shana Santana. The day I graduated from Miles Street, Shana Santana came and picked me up and she gave me a warm handoff from me to Acceptance Recovery Center. I stayed at Acceptance Recovery Center for a year. Still, I still hadn't fully surrendered because I still had some of my crazy ways, my character defects that I wasn't willing to work on. I got a job. I had a job at Safe Light distribution center, making a whole lot of money. And I got this bright idea. Well, I'm not gonna finish this program. I've done my 12 months. I've done my year, and that's that. I'm going to move next door. So I moved next door to ARC, and within 3 months, I was using again because I didn't want it. Let me say that. It wasn't that I wasn't given the necessary tools. It wasn't that I wasn't willing to use the tools that were given to me in that moment. And I I relapsed, and I went over to ARC, and I told Jackie Cosby, I said, girl, you got to give me some sugar. And then, mind you, I had found out my husband cheated on me. And I was just tired, man. I was beat up. I was tore up from the floor up. I went to ARC, and they saw how bad I was looking because I was like, I'm 270 now, and I was weighing like 110 pounds. And 3 days later, Ashley, Duke, Tara, and Michelle came and knocked on my door. And I wouldn't open the door, and they said, you can come back. We love you. 2 days later, I went back. I left the cars. I left my husband. I left everything. Mind you, that my turning point was August the 7th, 2022, when I was trying to find means and ways to get more dope. I was riding around. But mind you, before that, I had said a prayer. I said, God, place me into a situation. I'll never forget. Pastor Ricky always told me this, and he taught me this when I was at New Beginnings. I said, Father God, I said, I need for you to place me in a situation that was going to bring me to the end of myself. And he answered that prayer. I was down on the Black Road, and I went to cop. It was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And this guy was serving me. He was giving me kibbles and bits. But in that moment, when you trying to get high, you trying to get high. You don't even care. And I purchased it. And I went on the porch, and This little girl, she's deceased now. She passed away from an overdose. She said, "Auntie, give me a piece." I was like, "I'm not giving you nothing." So when I went to go use the drug itself, it fell on the floor. When it fell on the floor and I brought it back up past my nose, it was a mothball. Had I smoked that mothball, it'd have bust my heart and I would have died. So I made up in my mind that I was going to get into recovery no matter what. August the 7th, 2022 is when I truly surrendered my life over to God. And I asked him for his will to be done in my life. And it's been magnificent ever since. I've had a lot of hills and I've had a lot of valleys. I came to work for Divas Who Win in 2022 as a peer coach. I was hired. I worked here for 2 or 3 years, and it was amazing. Miss Shonda, she was really, really hard on me. But she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I was always told that I had all this potential, but I never knew I acquired potential. You know, but today I know I acquired that potential. August, another painful experience for me was when my son, my 19-year-old son, Tristan, uh, Tristan passed. He died from a rare form of cancer. Uh, and I'm grateful that I was there to be with him when he took his chemo, when he had to go to Eggleston. I was able to drive him. I was able to be the mother that he knew I could be because he was that child who always told me, "Mama, you strong. You can do anything you put your mind to." And he was able to see me at the top of my game. I was there when he took his last breath, and that was really, 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 really hard for me. But no matter how hard it was, I never had the desire to use. I never had the desire to use. I didn't want to get high. I didn't want to change the way I felt because I knew in order for me to get to the other side that I had to go through what I had to go through to get where I needed to be. And I buried my son. I stopped working at Divas Who Win. Uh, during the moment when Tristan was sick, I quit Divas. And it was a bad decision, but I was up under a lot of stress. I didn't know how I was going to work at Divas and how I was going to be there for my son, and I had to make a choice, and I chose my son. And I'm just grateful that I was able to do that. I'm just grateful I was in my right mind. Today, I'm a woman living in long-term recovery. Uh, August the 8th, 2026, I'll pick up 4 years clean. Um, I'm the second responder for the mobile crisis unit in Georgia. And I love my job. Um, I sponsor about 6 women. Uh, and August the 1st, I'll be opening up my LLC, which is called Taking It Back Resource Foundations. It'll be open August 1st. And I am a better wife. I'm a better mother. I'm a better grandmother. I'm a better friend. I've learned, and I tell my sponsees this all the time. There's a set destination. God wrote our stories before we were even conceived in our mother's womb, and we've heard that. And you're on the yellow brick road, and on the yellow brick road, you're gonna have some obstacles thrown on the yellow brick road, and those obstacles are set there for a reason, for you not to get to where God is trying to take you. They're called distractions. I just had a distraction thrown at me 2 weeks ago. I just found out that I have stage 4 CLL/SLL chronic lymphatic leukemia. I was just diagnosed with that, but I ain't finna go nowhere because God's not finished with me yet. I got kingdom work to do. I got to reach back. I've got to give back so freely what was given to me. I got to reach back or help another next sister or brother out the trenches by any means necessary. That means if I got to go to the street to get them, I'll go to the street to get them, and I'm willing to go get them. Thank you.